AI, and in particular ChatGPT, helped me sew a wrap dress out of this beautiful Ankara fabric. Let's find out. Hi, my name is Matilda and welcome back to Miss Matti. In this video, I will take you through the journey of constructing a wrap dress with the help of ChatGPT. In a lot of the reporting about AI recently, a lot of people say that AI will replace how-to videos here on YouTube. Does that mean that I and other DIY YouTubers will be replaced? And if so, is ChatGPT ready to guide us how to sew correctly? I just want to let you know before we dive in that I do know how to sew a wrap dress, and I'm a fashion designer with over 25 years of sewing experience. So if ChatGPT guides us in a very strange direction, I know how to guide us back to the right course, which of course, if you have no sewing experience or very little sewing experience, you might not know how to do. Okay, let's get started making this wrap dress. So here is all the pattern pieces. So just for full transparency, I've already altered the pattern to fit me better. The pattern and the materials that I got for this dress, I got in my Wax and Wraps box last year. I was gifted a box, but there was no obligation for me to post a video of me making the project. I just decided I really wanted to make this dress. So let's give ChatGPT its first prompts. Give me step-by-step instructions for how to construct a wrap dress in Ankara fabric. Let's see what ChatGPT says. Ooh, they are definitely giving me quite detailed instructions. Creating a wrap dress in Ankara fabric can be a fun and stylish project. Ankara fabric is known for its vibrant and colorful patterns, making it perfect for a wrap dress. Here's a step-by-step guide to help you construct one. Materials you need: Ankara fabric, about 3 to 4 yards depending on size and dress length. That's actually quite impressive that they gave us the amount that you normally need for a dress. Sewing machine, thread that matches your fabric, scissors, measuring tape, pins, iron and ironing board, hook and eye closure or ties for the wrap closure. Okay, interesting. So I'm a bit confused. I think I get what they're trying to say with the hook and eye closure, but we'll see what they say later on. Pattern paper or an existing wrap dress for reference, optional. I love that the pattern is optional. Step 1, take your measurements. Before you start, take your body measurements. You need your bust, waist, hip, and dress length measurements. If you're using a pattern, choose the appropriate size based on your measurements. Step 2, create a pattern, optional. Okay, that might be what they meant with optional, that it's optional to make your own, which makes more sense than that it is optional to have a pattern. If you don't have an existing wrap dress pattern, you can create a simple one using pattern paper or an old wrap dress as a reference. Ensure it includes a front and back panel with enough width for a comfortable wrap. Well, we're not gonna really get into the pattern cutting abilities of ChatGPT here. Maybe in another video we can try it out and see if ChatGPT can actually guide us on how to pattern cut a dress. Let me know if you want me to make a video like that. Step 3, cut the fabric. Fold your Ankara fabric in half, with the right sides facing each other. Place your pattern pieces on the fabric and pin them in place. Cut around the pattern pieces, leaving a seam allowance of a 1/2 inch or as desired. I have never really sewn with Ankara fabric before, so I would like some tips on what to think of when you sew with Ankara fabric. And in particular, I want some pattern placement tips. Because look at this fabric, it has these massive plantains on it, and I really want to make sure that it doesn't look weird and that we get the most out of this design. How do I pattern match my wax print Ankara fabric the best? My Ankara fabric has a bold print. Okay, let's see what ChatGPT has to say. Pattern matching with bold Ankara fabric can create a stunning and cohesive look for your dress. Yes, I know. And then they go on with a material list again. Step 1. Choose a simple pattern. Select a dress pattern that has relatively few seams, especially in the areas where you want the patterns to match. The more complex the pattern, the more challenging it is to achieve the perfect pattern matching. That's very true. Step 2. Pre-wash and press the fabric. Before cutting and sewing, wash and press your Ankara fabric. This helps remove any sizing or dirt. Sizing? What? Or dirt? This remove any sizing or dirt and allows the fabric to shrink if it will. This is very strange. Ironing the fabric makes it easy to work with and ensures it's smooth and even. This is probably the worst I've read so far. This doesn't even language-wise make sense. I actually read an article about AI hallucinations, which I will link down in the description box, and I wonder if this is one of those. Step 3. Lay out the fabric. Fold your fabric in half, ensuring that the selvages, finished edges, are aligned. This will be your fabric's centerfold. Step 4. Cut the fabric. Lay your pattern pieces on the fabric. Keep in mind how the patterns align to achieve the best pattern matching. Okay, I'm very curious. A. Place the pattern pieces on the fabric and pin them in place according to your desired pattern alignment. Make sure to consider both vertical and horizontal alignment. B. Use a ruler or measuring tape to check the distance between the pattern repeat is consistent across the pieces. Actually, something I have learned about Ankara fabric is that it is not always very consistent, and like many other patterned fabrics. Yeah, okay. That's basic pattern layouting tips. And then they go on talking about paying close attention to the marked matching points, which I fully agree with. And then step 7 is sew with care. Sew your dress with precision, taking your time to match the patterns along the seams. Sew with a consistent seam allowance to maintain the pattern alignment. So what I would say here instead is to pin a lot or base stitch and then use a walking foot to sew slower than normal, just to make sure that the fabrics are not shifting and moving and that they stay in place. And then they talk about pressing your seams carefully. Not that I'm really sure what that has to do with pattern matching, but okay. So I didn't really think that the answer that ChatGPT gave me was very satisfactory. So I went onto Google and I found a really good YouTube video by Juliet Usor. She has a really great video on how to pattern match your Ankara fabric, so I will link that video in the description box down below. She also has another video on everything you need to know on how to sew with Ankara fabric, so I will link that video for you as well. As my plantains are big and I have a limited amount of fabric, I didn't aim for a perfect pattern match. Instead, I moved the pattern pieces around to figure out where the placement of the plantains would look best. I prioritized the front and back over the side seams, focused on even pattern repeats rather than seamlessly matched plantains, and cut one layer at a time for precision. Good quality Ankara fabric looks similar both on the right and the wrong side, making it hard to distinguish. Look for text on the selvage to identify the right side and mark it with chalk or tape. Although the front body's pieces don't mirror each other, they work well when wrapped. I marked my notches, used more pins than usual, and stitched slowly with my walking foot. The waist seam plantains don't match perfectly, but this isn't a concern since we will add a tie around the waist. Can you include instructions on how I can finish my seam allowance on the wrap dress? Oh my god. Alright, it's actually giving me some instructions here. Method 1 is zigzag stitch finish. Completely legit way to finish off your seam allowances with. Method 2, overlock or serger finish, which is probably the method I will go for. And then method 3 is French seam, and method 4 is bias tape. So they're all really great suggestions on how to finish your seams. I will overlock my edges. But when I'm reading through these instructions, I don't know, I don't really think these steps are very useful. Like, besides maybe search along the edge and practice on a piece of scrap fabric before you finish the edges on your actual dress. That's about the most useful thing in here, but then it's a lot of words that sound good. Step 4. Sew the dress panels. Pin along the sides and shoulder seams. Use a straight stitch to sew these seams, leaving the armholes open. I'm glad that they at least told us to do that. Trim the seam allowances and press the seams open. So far it sounds really good. It sounds like it instructs us to sew a normal dress. While it sounds all good, they missed the point that this is a wrap dress, not just a dress. In the fact that they haven't really included that we need 2 front pieces to wrap on top of each other. And another thing they haven't mentioned at all is any facings. This is my neck facing, and this is my front facing. Of course, you do not necessarily need to have facings to finish your garment, but if you want to make a well-constructed garment, you want to have something, either like a bias tape or a facing or similar, to create more structure here at the neck. And if you don't have sleeves, which they haven't included here, and I acknowledge that it's my fault for not specifying that, but if I was to make a sleeveless dress, I would need something to finish off my armhole as well. Let's continue, maybe they are including it later on. Step 5. Hem the edges. Hem the armholes, neckline and the bottom of the dress. You can fold the edges over twice, iron them in place, and then sew close to the folded edge. So I actually think I'm gonna ask ChatGPT if I should stay stitch on my dress and how to stay stitch. Okay, I'm getting actually quite a lot of suggestions on stay stitching. Let's see how it's doing. Stay stitching is a technique in sewing that helps prevent curved or bias cut fabric edges from stretching out of shape. Very true. Then it has instructions here on how to stay stitch the neckline and the armholes. Stitch a line of stay stitching about 1/8 of an inch, 3mm inside the seam allowance. This is typically done at a slightly shorter stitch length, e.g. 1.5 to 2mm, to help stabilize the curve. Start the stay stitching at the center back of the neckline and stitch towards the front. Repeat the process on the other side, stitching towards the center front. Avoid pulling or stretching the fabric while stay stitching. Keep it relaxed. So these instructions are actually really decent. The only thing I really want to highlight is that when it said stay stitch around 1/8 of an inch inside the seam allowance, it's a bit confusingly written, because you can either read it as inside the edge of the fabric on the seam allowance, or you can read it as 3mm or 1/8 of an inch away from the stitch line, which is the correct way to stay stitch. But otherwise, spot on. How do I finish the neckline on my wrap dress? Blah, 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 blah. Finishing your neckline on a wrap dress is an important step to give a professional, clean look, blah, 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 blah. I did a test run with this a little while back, and they only gave me the finishing tip of like rolling the seam over and then stitch on top. But now they actually have improved. They now have method 1, bias tape finish, method 2, self fabric facing. Then they have method 3, which was their old favorite method, the rolled hem finish. And then they have method 4, single fold hem. So yeah, I'm actually impressed. So let's see what they say when it comes to the self fabric facing. 1. Cut a strip of fabric from your Ankara fabric to use as facing. Pin the facing strip to the neckline. Sew the facing strip using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Trim the seam allowance to reduce bulk and clip notches around the curves to allow fabric to lay flat. Press the facing strip away from the neckline. Fold the facing strip to the inside of the dress, encasing the raw edge of the neckline. Stitch the facing strip in place close to the edge. If you do not want a visible edge stitch on your neckline, you do not need to do the last step. And instead you can just make sure to do some understitching on the facing itself. It's the method I really like to do. And then I would also make sure to stitch down the facing at the shoulder seam to like hold it in place. I do not know about you, but there's nothing more I hate than a flappy, flimsy facing. Let's ask about understitching. Do I need to understitch anywhere in my dress, e.g. my neckline facing? I'm helping it a little bit there. In a wrap dress, understitching the neckline facing is a good idea because it helps the facing stay inside and prevents it from flipping out when you wear the dress. Here's how to do it. After attaching the facing to the neckline, press the seam allowance towards the facing. Stitch close to the seam line on the facing side, typically about 1/8 of an inch, 3 millimeters away from the seam line. Ensure that you are stitching only through the facing and the seam allowance, not the dress fabric itself. Stitch around the entire neckline and pivot carefully at corners or curves. Be sure to backstitch at the beginning and end of your understitching. Once you have understitched the facing, press it again, this time with the facing folded to the inside of the dress. The understitching should help the facing lay flat and remain hidden. Keep in mind that understitching is not typically used on all seams, but primarily on facings or areas where it's essential to maintain a clean, flat finish. I personally love understitching. When I learned that technique, my garments started to look so much better, so much more professional. Highly recommend understitching. If you're not understitching already, you really should get started. Step 6. Cut a strip of Ankara fabric to use as a waistband. It should be long enough to wrap around your waist with some overlap. Fold it in lengthwise with the right size facing, sew along the long edge, and then turn it right side out. Press it flat. Okay, so that was actually decent enough a description on how to make the ties. I actually tested ChatGPT a little bit before when I was exploring this video idea, and that time it did not tell me how to make the ties. It just said create ties. So this is an improvement. Step 7. Attach the waistband. Pin the waistband. I wouldn't call it a waistband when it's ties. Waist ties? I don't know. Pin the waistband to the side. Oh, this is when it gets weird. Pin the waistband to the inside of the dress at your natural waistline, ensuring it's centered and covers the raw edges of the front and back panels. Sew it in place along the top edge. What are they talking about? So I thought these were the ties. So I'm taking everything back I just said about ChatGPT doing better, because this is some weird waistband that we are attaching after we constructed the whole dress. And then we create a wrap. Here it comes. Step 8. Create a wrap. To create the wrap part of the dress, sew ties or add hook and eye closures to the inside of the dress at the waistband. You can use long fabric strips for ties or sew in hook and eyes for more secure closure. So now let's ask ChatGPT how I will create the ties for my wrap dress. Oh my god, I feel like they're just giving me so long instructions. Blah, 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 blah. Determine tie length and width. I've already done that. Fold and sew the ties. Turn the tubes right side out. Trim and close the ties. Step 5, attach the ties to the dress. But let's see if they can actually instruct me how to create that little opening in my waistline. Step 1 is to determine the location of the opening, and then cut out the fabric for the opening. Cut a rectangular piece that is slightly wider and longer than the opening you want to create. Step 3, finish the edges of the fabric piece. Step 4, with your dress inside out. Position the rectangular piece of fabric over the location where you want the opening. Align the top edge of the fabric piece with the waistline of the dress. Step 5. Create the opening. Using your sewing machine, stitch around the 3 sides of the fabric piece, leaving the top edge, the one aligned with the waistline, open. Make sure your stitches are close to the edge and secure the fabric piece to the dress. Step 6. Reinforce the opening. To make the opening clean and secure, you can reinforce it by folding the top edge of the fabric piece over and sewing it down. Okay. Maybe. I have never done this. Let me know your take on this suggestion. It's something I would never thought of, and I'm not sure if it's correct, but I'm not sure if it's wrong either. Here is what I did instead. I sewed a small opening at the waist on the left side seam. I marked the opening, stitched up until the marked spot, fastened, and then continued stitching after the marking. You can see the opening here for the tie. To secure it, I stitched a square shape around the opening and made sure it was fastened properly. So now I will ask ChatGPT how to construct bishop sleeves. My dress has bishop sleeves. Please guide me how to construct them. Creating bishop sleeves for Ankara dress is beautiful, stylish addition. Here's a step-by-step guide on how to help you construct sleeves. Then they have a materials list again. They love that apparently. Step 1 is to take sleeve measurements. Step 2 is to create a sleeve pattern. Step 3, cut the fabric. And then Step 4, sew the sleeve seams. With the right sides of the fabric together, sew along the vertical seam. The one perpendicular, that word and I today doesn't work, of the gathering line to the edge of the fabric. What? I don't know what they mean with that, but this is the seam. Basically a normal seam on a sleeve. So then it goes on and explains how to gather your sleeves, which I will not do. So I will not read that, but the explanations sounds pretty decent actually. Instead of gathering the bottom of my sleeve and attaching a placket, I hemmed it and left a little opening for the elastic. Step 6. Attach the sleeves. With the dress inside out, place the sleeves inside the armholes, matching the raw edges of the sleeves with the armhole edges of the dress. Pin in place and sew the sleeves to the dress. Once the sleeves were set, I attached a safety pin to the elastic and pulled it through the casing. After it was pulled through, I stitched the elastic ends together to form a circle. Then I stitched the opening close, and now my sleeve is complete. Step 9. Final adjustments. Try on the dress to ensure it fits properly. Make any necessary adjustments to the fit and the length. Hem the dress to your desired length if you haven't already. We were told to hem the dress at step 5, and we're now at step 9, and we're told to hem it again if we haven't. Well, I appreciate a reminder to hem my dress because it's not really my favorite activity to do. Step 10, finish and wear. Once you're satisfied with the fit and look of your dress, trim any loose threads. Give it a final press with the iron. Your Ankara wrap dress is now ready to wear. I am actually quite impressed with what they have given me, but there is a problem with this instruction. At first glance, it sounds like a proper sewing tutorial, but then you come to this step about creating the waistband, and I'm like, what? And there is zero explanation that I need to create two front pieces so that they wrap on top of each other. And there is also no explanation on how you create the ties, although the waistband sounds like creating ties. What's your opinion on ChatGPT's sewing advice? Will it replace me anytime soon? Let me know in the comments. And until next time, bye!